probably asked one theological question more than any other. More than any other doctrine, it has to do with the end times, the last days. Are we in the end times? Is this event we're seeing part of the end times? Could we be living in the end times? Well, let me answer that question for you today by giving you a timeline of what I believe is going to be happening during the end times. So this is kind of a historic timeline. Jesus came to earth, rose again 3 days later, walked on the earth, and then ascended into heaven. A week later, on the day of Pentecost, the church was born in Jerusalem, and we've been living in a prophetic time period called the church age ever since, the age of the Holy Spirit in God's people on planet Earth. Well, that's going to end at the next prophetic event, the big prophetic event, which is the rapture. This whole season is the end times, but really it all kicks off big time with the rapture. Jesus comes to gather his church up to be with him in heaven, while on earth there's 7 years of awful, terrible suffering, especially the last 3.5 called the tribulation. Well, that ends when Jesus comes again and sets up his millennial kingdom on the earth, and that's 1,000-year rule and reign of Jesus on planet Earth. And then that leads to the new heaven and the new earth. That's a big picture. Let me give you a few details. I think the last days started in 1948 when Israel became a nation, because so much of what's happening in the end times has to do with Israel being a nation in the promised land. So that happened in 1948. I believe the end times began the day Israel became a nation. The rapture, as I mentioned, Jesus coming to gather his church at the end of the church age, and then the tribulation. And the tribulation has two periods, really. The tribulation, which is terrible, the Holy Spirit's been taken out of the planet. God's beginning to pour out his judgment upon the earth. During this time, the false prophet is gathering people to worship the Antichrist. The Antichrist is rising in power over a European-based global government, and then he comes fully to power 3.5 years into the tribulation, the abomination, the desolation described in Daniel. And then we have the Great Tribulation, where persecution will be unlimited, suffering will be unlimited. That ends in a series of wars, the battles of Armageddon, leading to the Battle of Armageddon, when the nations, instead of fighting each other, will try to fight Jesus, and he will come to earth with his angels and his saints, and Jesus will defeat the nations, set up his millennial kingdom, his rule, his reign on planet Earth, 1,000 years, Jesus ruling, peace, prosperity on planet Earth. Satan will be bound during those 1,000 years. During this time of the tribulation, somewhere the saints are going to be judged, whether it's an individual or all of us at the same time. It's called the Beam of Judgment Seat of Christ, where we will be rewarded for what we've done. And I believe one of the rewards is we'll get to participate in the wedding supper as the bride of Christ. And I believe that wedding supper is going to last 1,000 years. You see, for an average man, the wedding of his son could last a day to a week. For a rich man, it could last as much as 2 weeks. For a king, it might last a month. But for the King of Kings, the wedding supper is going to last, I think, 1,000 years. In heaven, there's going to be people on earth, but in heaven, we'll be enjoying the wedding supper of the Lamb. Well, that ends when Satan is allowed out. He gathers some of these earth people to rebel. And then there's the great white throne judgment, where every non-believer in history is judged. And they are judged and condemned guilty for their sins and will be thrown into the lake of fire. Everyone who's at this other judgment, who's a child of God, they will get to experience the new heaven and the new earth, which is going to be awesome. It's going to last forever. So, a lot going on. We'll talk a little more details tomorrow, but I want you to see God's got a plan. Right now, we're in the end times, awaiting the rapture and the beginning of the tribulation. And our job right now is to get ready. Our job is to be ready. Our job is to help other people get ready. Why? Because Jesus is coming again.